There is a story about Bruce Lee that almost no one knows. It is not in official documentaries. It does not appear in biographies approved by the family. And for decades it was hidden in personal notes, behind-the-scenes recordings and reports that never reached the public. During the most intense years of his career, when Bruce was already recognized worldwide, rumors began to circulate within Hong Kong studios and among Hollywood producers. He was no longer training just for films. He was preparing for someone. This someone didn't appear in interviews, didn't give public demonstrations, didn't have a school, didn't have students, but appeared behind the scenes, silent, observing. A man always described in the same way by those who saw him. Blank stare, movements too precise to be human, and a coldness that made even the most experienced fighters uncomfortable. Reports indicate that Bruce faced this man in private sessions without cameras, without an audience, without official records. And the strangest thing, there were no reliable witnesses about who won. What exists are fragments, a broken note in a notebook, a damaged audio tape, and a phrase that Bruce said days later to a close friend. "I finally found someone who doesn't fight like a man." Why did this story never come to light? Who was this rival? And what did Bruce Lee discover in that confrontation that changed his way of seeing combat, philosophy, and even his own identity? Some believe this explains the change in his thoughts in the last years of his life. Others say this was the beginning of a fear he never revealed publicly. What you will hear now is not the popular version. It's the version that was hidden. For years, any mention of a possible secret rival of Bruce Lee was treated as rumor, exaggeration, or behind-the-scenes invention. But the silence surrounding this episode did not arise by chance. It was constructed, reinforced, and, at times, deliberately maintained. In the early 1970s, Bruce was not just an actor or martial artist. He was a valuable cultural asset, a rising symbol that connected the Asian and Western markets. Studios invested millions in his image. Producers depended on his presence to sell films, and any narrative that cast doubt on his public invincibility represented a direct commercial risk. The idea that there was someone capable of facing him, and perhaps even surpassing him, was simply unacceptable to those who profited from his aura. But this is just the first level. The second level is within Bruce's own circle. People close to him report that after a specific period of private training, he changed. He became more introspective, more selective with whom he trained, and began recording thoughts in notebooks that were never published in full. In some of these notes, there were reflections on unintentional opponents, motionless movement, and a recurring concern: how to fight against someone who does not react like an ordinary human being. There are indirect records of meetings in closed places, without attendance records, organized by intermediaries who never revealed their names. A producer even mentioned in an interview years later that Bruce had canceled an important recording after a training session that didn't seem like training, but a test. When pressed for details, he backed off and said only, "It wasn't something to be filmed." And then there's the third level, the most uncomfortable. Some reports suggest that Bruce himself did not want this to come to light, not for fear of losing reputation, but because the confrontation would have shaken something deeper: his conviction that human adaptation, fluidity, and consciousness were always superior to any rigid system. If there were someone who fought without ego, without emotion, without hesitation, someone who could not be read, provoked, or anticipated, that would call into question the entire philosophical basis he was building. Think about it coldly. The Bruce Lee brand depended on the idea of evolution, freedom, and individual expression in combat. But what if he had encountered an opponent who represented the absolute opposite: efficiency without identity, precision without humanity? There is a detail rarely mentioned. After these meetings, Bruce intensified his studies on rhythm, pause, intention, and mainly on the void between actions. As if he was trying to understand something he couldn't simply defeat with speed or strength. Documents disappeared. Witnesses changed versions. Conversations were interrupted when the topic came up. And so, little by little, the story was pushed into the shadows. But one question continues to resist time, like an echo that no one has managed to completely silence. Who was this rival? Before any attempt is made to identify who the rival was, it is necessary to understand what really happened in the meetings that were never recorded. According to fragmented reports linked to Bruce Lee's circle, there was more than one session, always in the same pattern: closed doors, No spectators, no photographers, no cameras, just Bruce, the adversary, and silence. The first meeting would have taken place as a technical test. Bruce entered as he always did, observing, measuring distance, studying rhythm. He believed that every fight began before the first move, but something didn't fit. The rival showed no intention. There was no tension in the shoulders, no micro-expressions, no change in breathing. It was like looking at a perfectly prepared body, but empty of human signs. On the second date, Bruce decided to pick up the pace. He attacked first. Quick sequences, unpredictable angles, base changes, exactly the kind of approach that dismantled traditional fighters. But what was described by an indirect source is disturbing. The opponent was not reacting in the human sense of the word. He was simply already where he needed to be, as if Bruce's every action had been predicted before it even began. This is where the story begins to leave the physical territory and enter the psychological. Bruce always argued that struggle was expression, an extension of the self. For him, intention, emotion, and consciousness were weapons. But in that confrontation, those same weapons seemed useless. There was no ego to provoke, no fear to exploit, no emotional pattern to break. After the third meeting, something changed. A note attributed to Bruce describes, "When there is no mind on the other side, there is no mirror. And without a mirror, there is no way to see yourself." This profoundly shook the way he understood combat, because Bruce didn't just fight to win. He fought to express himself, to discover himself. But how to do this in front of someone who didn't reflect anything back? There is a detail that almost no one talks about. After these sessions, Bruce started training periods of total immobility. He spent minutes without moving, without reacting, just watching his own breathing. People close to us were surprised, and it wasn't speed training or strength training. It was something else. An attempt to access a state where action is not born from emotion, but from emptiness. Some say he realized in that confrontation that his greatest strength was also his greatest limitation, his humanity, his ability to feel, think, interpret. Everything that made him unique also made him predictable to someone who didn't operate within those parameters. And then comes the most disturbing discovery. Bruce would have understood that there were two types of fighters, those who fight to win, and those who simply execute. And the rival didn't fight. He executed. No story, no identity, no internal conflict. For Bruce, this raised a question that went beyond any physical combat. If technical perfection can exist without humanity, then what is the true purpose of fighting? Over the next few days, he began to quietly reformulate his own principles. What was once freedom of expression has come to include something more radical, the ability to exist without form, without pattern, and perhaps even without ego. But this change was not announced. It was not taught openly. It was restricted to notes, loose ideas, and private conversations, because revealing this would mean admitting that Bruce Lee, the symbol of human expression in combat, had encountered something that could not be defeated in the traditional way. And all of this happened before anyone even knew who the man on the other side was. Because the real question wasn't just about identity, it was about nature. For years, those who tried to piece together this story always ran into the same obstacle: crossed out names, incomplete reports, and an almost intentional absence of identity. It was as if someone had gone out of their way to erase any trace of who the man was who faced Bruce Lee in the private sessions. But some fragments survived, and when placed side by side, they reveal something that completely changes the reading of this story. The rival was no ordinary fighter, not a known champion, not anyone from the traditional martial arts circuit. He came from outside this universe, and that, in itself, already explained part of the mystery. Indirect sources described that he was of African origin, a man who did not belong to any formal school recognized in Asia or the West, but who carried his own method of combat, shaped by different cultural influences and by training that did not follow commercial or sporting standards. The most intriguing thing, however, was not its origin. It was his technique. Those who observed the training described something disconcerting. The man's style was reminiscent of Bruce Lee, but he wasn't a copy. It was as if two different lines of thought had independently arrived at the same point. Short movements, absolute energy savings, direct attacks, absence of flourishes, a brutal efficiency that eliminated any unnecessary gesture. But there was an essential difference. While Bruce sought total freedom of expression within combat, that man operated in internal silence. His movements had no visible intention, carried no emotion, conveyed no psychological presence. He didn't enter the fight. He was already there. Some reports say that Bruce was fascinated to notice this structural similarity. It was like looking into a distorted mirror of his own philosophy, a version where all the principles of efficiency were present, but without the human layer that he considered essential. And then comes the detail that almost no one talks about. There are indications that this rival was not introduced to Bruce by chance. It was brought to him by intermediaries who wanted to test the limits of what Bruce had developed, as if someone, somewhere, had heard about his philosophy and decided to put in front of him someone who was already living it, but through a completely different path. This changes everything, because it means Bruce didn't create something unique in the world. He discovered something that already existed, in another form, in another culture, in another mind. After the meetings, Bruce did not speak publicly about this man. He did not reveal his name. It did not record its origin in detail. And this still feeds the feeling that there was a silent agreement, that confrontation would never be turned into a spectacle. But there is one last piece rarely mentioned. In a private conversation, recorded years later by someone close to Bruce's circle, he reportedly said a phrase that sums it all up. "I found someone who fights like me, without having to be me." This phrase is more than a compliment. It's a confession. Because at that moment, Bruce realized that his philosophy was not his property. It was a path, and others were already walking along it, in places where no one was looking. And that's why this story remained hidden for so long. It wasn't just about an invincible rival. It was about discovering that the real fight is not against another man, but against the idea that you are unique. The meeting with that African rival was not just an isolated episode in Bruce Lee's trajectory. It was a breaking point, a moment in which his philosophy stopped being just a theory applied to combat and became a deep reflection on what it means to be human amid pressure, conflict, and the constant need to adapt. Bruce realized something uncomfortable. An opponent without emotion, without ego, and without hesitation is technically efficient, but he is also incomplete. He executes, but he doesn't live the fight. Don't learn from him. It does not evolve through it. It is a machine for perfect answers, but empty of meaning. And it led him to a silent conclusion. Humanity, with all its flaws, fear, doubt, impulse, hesitation, is not a weakness. It is precisely what allows growth, awareness, and transformation. When Bruce returned from those private meetings, he didn't come away saying he had faced an invincible opponent. He left with something more powerful, the certainty that victory is not just in neutralizing the other, but in not losing yourself in the process. This point of view completely changes the way we look at everyday difficulties. At work, in business, in personal relationships, you often face opponents who seem cold, calculating, immune to pressure. Situations in which you feel at a disadvantage because you feel, think, question. But the lesson Bruce learned from this confrontation is clear. It's not the absence of emotion that defines strength. It's the ability to use your humanity consciously. Because in the real world, you're not just fighting to win. You are fighting to evolve, to position yourself, to build identity. And that requires exactly what the rival didn't have: presence, intention, and meaning. True superiority, as Bruce realized, is not in becoming a perfect machine. It's about mastering your emotions without losing your essence. It's about acting clearly, but with purpose. It's about adapting without becoming empty. This is the difference between executing movements and living a philosophy. Now the final question comes back to you who have followed this story so far. In your own daily battles, are you trying to act like an efficient machine, or like someone who learns, adapts, and grows with each encounter? If this story sparked something in you, then you already understand the essence of what Bruce Lee discovered. And there are many other hidden, little-known stories full of lessons like this waiting to be explored. So do this. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because in the next videos you will discover behind the scenes, forgotten archives, and narratives that will challenge the way you see history, power, strategy, and identity. Because some stories aren't just made to entertain, they are made to transform,